Is there a way to find your true passion, or is that just a cliche? Well, it's definitely a cliche, and it's the sort of thing that actually annoys me quite a lot about New Age thinkers, and I would more or less put Joseph Campbell in that category. I think you can find what compels you and what might enable you to live in a high quality manner despite the suffering that's associated with life. I think you can discover that, and I think part of the way you discover that is by watching yourself and learning when it is that you're meaningfully engaged. You have to notice that. It's something that happens to you in some sense rather than something that you do. You have to notice when you're meaningfully engaged. And then you have to work to expand the amount of time that you spend in that state. But I would also say that there are moral requirements that go along with that too, because you might say, well, what if you happen to be the sort of person, for example, who finds torturing small animals meaningfully engaging? It seems like that's the sort of meaningful engagement that you probably don't want to expand. So I would say that if you're going to set up your life so that you maximize your meaningful engagement, there's a number of other things that you have to do at the same time. And one of those is that you have to get very clear about who you are and what you're doing. And so, although this would be grounds for a much longer discussion, I think that one of the things that you have to do if you're going to attempt to maximize meaningful engagement is that you also have to do such things as endeavor to stop deceiving yourself and other people in every way you possibly can. And part of the reason for that is that if you engage in deception of any sort, you pathologize the structure, first the structure of your being, but you could say you pathologize the structure of your nervous system, and then you can't trust its reports. So if you're going to rely on your nervous system's reports of meaningful engagement to guide your future activities, you better do everything you can to make sure that you're not filling that nervous system with the kind of garbage that's going to make it malfunction and give you false reports. So I think that moving towards meaningful engagement has to be associated with making truth your highest value, because otherwise you can't trust yourself as your own guide. I mean, the Catholics have struggled with this for a long time from a theological perspective, because the Catholic position, roughly speaking, is that human beings are so steeped in sin that they can't trust their own instincts in relationship to good and evil, and have to use the church and the priesthood as an intermediary. And, you can obviously have an argument about that, and of course Protestants have historically done that, but you got to give the Catholics their due. It's like people aren't pure by nature and only trammeled in their vision by sociological impediments. They're also corrupt beyond belief individually and have to use society as a source of value. So if you're going to personalize your life in some sense, you better act in a manner that makes you a reliable guide.
How much trouble would you want there not to be? It's a weird question, right? Because you want to have something to contend with. You want to have something that forces from you the best that you have. And so you have to have real problems. It's something like that. Would you dispense with all your real... You could just lay down on a bed and have pablum infused into your mouth, if all your problems were solved. And so maybe you want difficult problems that you can solve, something like that, because there's some... I don't know what it is about it. There's the overcoming and the growth that comes along with that. There's something about the nobility of the enterprise. You certainly see that when you go about having children, for example, which is, the psychological literature is quite clear. If you do moment-to-moment comparisons of people who have kids and people who don't have kids, the people who don't have kids are happier. And so psychologists who tend to get things wrong even when they make intelligent discoveries like that one, immediately, some of them, jump to the conclusion that because happiness is the goal, that, well, there's something about children that, make you unhappy, and that's not good. It's like, well, wait a second, maybe that's the wrong metric. It's like, of course you're less happy once you have children because you have to worry about them. My neighbor down the street, who's a very smart woman, said to me once, you can only be as happy as your unhappiest child, and which I thought was really good, that's really smart. But then it isn't, well, if having children doesn't make you happy, the answer isn't don't have children. It's like, don't be so stupid about being happy. That's the answer. It's because there's a nobility in the pursuit, right? And of course, now you're responsible. You know, you have a new baby, you think, especially if you're a new parent, you think, what the hell is this? And what am I going to do with it? You know, it's like, and then you're done for the rest of your life. You never sleep properly again because you're going to be worried about this creature that you have to take care of. But like, what the hell good are you if you're not doing that, or something else equally difficult? Because you just haven't been called out yet, unless you take on a responsibility like that. The idea that life is, you know, that happiness is the purpose of life. It's like, great for happiness, man. If it comes along, you should be thrilled that it's visiting you. But the notion that that's what you should pursue, that's the weakest possible notion. First of all, as soon as something terrible happens to you, you're done. It's like, life is to be happy. It's like, well, now you have cancer. So how's that? How's the happiness thing working out for you now? Or maybe it's not you, you know, maybe it's your father that has Alzheimer's disease or some damn thing. And, you know, it's like, it's a rare person that doesn't have some catastrophe one person away from them. It's like, life is to be happy. That's not right. And we can at least derive that from these stories. That isn't what they say at all. God's perfectly happy in the stories to grant the people with whom he forms a covenant happiness and prosperity, but there's never a word that that's the purpose. The rule is, aim high and get your bloody act together. That's the rule. And establish this contractual covenant with the ultimate ideal, and that will see you through the catastrophes. And that's a much more mature way of looking at life, as far as I'm concerned, because all you have to do is have your eyes half open and you see that the fundamental reality of life is tragedy and suffering. That's inescapable. That doesn't mean that it makes life unbearable, or that it makes being something that shouldn't have existed. Right? That isn't what it means, but it means that you have to contend with it and you have to get ready. And the willingness to adopt responsibility for yourself and for others is the precondition for that. And then maybe if you do that properly, then now and then you get some happiness. You know, you can sit at the end of a day and you have half an hour where your conscience is clear and there's nothing that you need to be doing, and you can relax and think, you know, that's all right, things are okay, and thank God for that. And that's maybe where you get your happiness. So, yeah, that's something. That's growing up, man, obviously. And to not know that, and to not be taught that. Like, everyone should be taught that. It's so obvious. This is really an interesting one, I think. I mean, so, I don't know what God's doing here exactly, but he's helping ignite the sacrificial flame. And that's kind of an interesting idea, I think, because, you know, let's say that you have an impulse to make a sacrifice. You think, well, I should change this about my life. Well, it's like, where does that come from, that impulse? It's just, well, it manifests itself out of nothing. So, well, or you came up with it. Well, you might want to stop thinking so surely that you come up with your own thoughts. You don't come up with your damn dreams, do you? They just happen. And God only knows where they come from. They come from your brain. Oh boy, that's a sophisticated answer. They come from your unconscious. Well, that's not much better. At least it's somewhat better. But there those amazing dramas take place in the theater of your imagination at night. You don't even understand what they are, and yet they occur night after night. And those things, dreams, they can contain wisdom that it just staggers the person who has the dream once they get the key to the dream, once they remember it. It's like, oh, look, you just revealed a bunch of wisdom to yourself that you didn't know. Well, where'd that come from? Well, you don't know. How in the world can you dream up things that you don't know? That's a tough one. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point in this lecture series, because there are some reasonable things that can be said about that. But, you know, the idea that there's something that's not you. Jung would call it the self. Carl Jung would call it the self, which he thought of as the totality of your being across time and space. It's something like that. And that, you know, each second that you exist is a slice of the self manifesting itself across time and space. And he thought of the self as partly the voice of conscience, whatever that is, that helps guide you when you have to make a difficult decision. And a difficult decision might be, well, what do I need to sacrifice? How do I need to discipline myself, right? What do I need to forego? Well, how do you figure those things out? Well, this picture is trying to put forth the idea that perhaps if you had established the proper relationship with God the Father, and we've talked about what that might mean, then he would help figure out how to get the sacrificial fires burning so that you could stay in a proper relationship with him across time. Well, if that's such an unreasonable proposition, what's the alternative proposition? Well, this isn't working out very well, that's for sure. Cain seems to be doing it, I don't know what it is. It's as if he thinks he can only do it himself, or maybe he wants only to take credit for it, or something like that. He's not in this grateful, let's say, and grateful and inquiring posture. Because that's what a prayer for posture should be. It should be grateful and inquiring. And grateful is, thank God things aren't worse for me than they are. And you should be grateful about that, because they could be a lot worse than they are, man. They can be so bad. And inquiring would be, well, I don't really know how I could make it better, but I'm open to suggestions, man. If I can figure out how to do it, I'll try it. That's the humility and the inquiry. That's a humble inquiry. How could I make things better? It's something like that. And that's like, what sacrifices do I need to make in order to make things better? That's a good question to ask yourself. You could ask yourself that every morning. What sacrifice do I have to make things better? You can decide what constitutes better. How about that? Then it's not even as if it's being imposed on you. Come up with your own notion of what constitutes better. Try to make it sophisticated. It should just be better for you, because that isn't going to work very well, right? You're just going to fall downstairs if you do that, because you have to live with other people. And besides, it's stupid anyways. What are you going to do? There's nothing you can even say about that. It's so, that's the attitude of a very badly behaved, hyper-aggressive 2-year-old. And I mean that technically. And so you could ask yourself, well, how I have this day that lays itself out in front of me. What thing could I let go of that's impeding my progress, that if I let go of would make my life better, my family's life better, my culture's life better, my being better? And then that would give you something to do for the day, wouldn't it? And to justify your miserable life. Because you need that. That's the whole point of the first story of Adam and Eve. What do you have? A miserable life. Okay. What am I going to do about that? Well, if you just have a miserable life, you're just going to suffer stupidly and get bitter about it. That's what happens to Cain. It's like, well, how about not doing that? Because that seems to just take a bad deal and make it worse. How about making a sacrifice and seeing if you can please God and put being on track? God, that'd be something to do. What could be better than that? What could possibly be better than that? Well, that's why it's archetypal, man, because nothing's better than that. That's where it tops out. So when you can do that every day. You'd have to do it in a little way, because well, what good are you, You're not going to go and bring this socialist utopia into being in one fell swoop. You might also think that, one of the things Cain might figure out here, there's a couple of things that just aren't going right for him. Downwind of the fire, not the right place to blow from. And the fact that he's enveloped in haze and smoke and breathing it in, and the fire isn't burning, might be an indication that he's doing something wrong. Or he could be wiping his eyes and saying, Jesus, what kind of stupid bloody universe would produce smoke like this? It's like, yes, well, that's the more likely outcome. And the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. Now that's an interesting line, because, and I've looked at a variety of different translations of this 7th verse here, like a bunch of them, because the translation for that's a critical line, and the translation really matters. And so I'll tell you what I think the story is, what I've been able to figure out. And I'm sure I haven't got it completely right, but it's... So he asks, God says to him, if you do well, won't you be accepted? Well, there's a hint there, right? It's something like, well, things aren't going so well for you. So the first thing you might think is, you're not doing well. Well, does that mean you're not doing good? Does that not mean you're not acting properly? It means it's the hint, because God is suggesting that if you were doing it properly, you would be successful. I had a friend at one point who was a very bitter person. And he had a bunch of problems, and some of them were self-inflicted, and some of them were fate, I suppose. And he had become very, very destructive, murderously destructive, genocidally destructive, I would say. You could see it in his dreams. And he lived with me for a while. And I knew him very well. He was a friend of mine from the time I was 12 until the time he committed suicide when he was about 40. And when he lived with me, I was trying to help him get on his feet, which was why he had come to live with me, because he thought maybe I could help him get on his feet. And he could only take relatively low-level jobs, like he had some mechanical ability. He didn't get educated, although he's a very, very smart person. He probably had an IQ of about 135 or something like that. He was very smart, and so he was bitter too because he hadn't educated himself to the level that his intellect would have demanded. So he had to take jobs that were beneath him intellectually, and he had that real intellectual arrogance, because he was smart. And really smart people often come to believe that only smart matters, and if they're smart and all that matters is smart, and then the world isn't sort of laying itself at their feet, then they've been terribly betrayed. And then they cling to their intelligence, which is more like a talent or a gift, like it's an idol, a false idol, which is exactly what it is, and a very dangerous one, and get cynical about the stupidity of the world and the fact that their talents weren't properly recognized. And that's just not that helpful, because smart is a good thing, but I'll tell you, if you don't use it properly, it will devour you, just like all arbitrarily assigned talents, right? So you might have a talent, but it's your friend if you use it properly, and if you misuse it, it will be your enemy. And maybe that's how God keeps the cosmic scales adjusted. But anyhow, my friend was a very smart person, although not as smart as he thought he was, unfortunately, but he hadn't done what would have been necessary with that intelligence to make it manifest itself properly in the world, and that also embittered him because he also knew that there was more that he could have done if he would have done it, and perhaps more that he could still do. What I was suggesting to him while he was living with us, because he was, 2 levels from homeless by that point, was that he should find a job that he could find, working in a garage, working in a shop, something like that, because he had some mechanical ability, and that he should separate himself from the arrogance that made him presume that such a job would be beneath him, because at that point no job was beneath him. But more importantly, it's not so obvious that jobs are beneath people, because imagine you have a job as a checkout person in a grocery store. It's a fairly unskilled job. You can be some miserable, resentful, horrid bastard doing that job, boy. You can come in there just exuding resentment and bitterness and making mistakes and making sure that every customer that passes by you has a slightly worse day than they need to, right? And pilfering time and perhaps pilfering goods and being resentful about the people who gave you the position because they're above you in the dominance hierarchy, and talking, bad things, gossiping behind the back of your coworkers. It's like you can take your menial position, self-described, and turn that into a very nice little slice of hell. There's this idea in Christianity that we've discussed briefly that the judge and the redeemer are the same figure. Now, in the book of Revelation, you may know this or you may not, Christ comes back as a judge, and he has a sword coming. It's a revelatory vision, that book. It's a very strange. It's the last thing you'd expect conservative Christians to believe in. Believe me, it's such a visionary hallucination, the book of Revelation. But Christ comes back with a sword coming out of his mouth, and he comes back as a judge, and he divides the damned from the redeemed, and most are damned and some are redeemed. It's very, very harsh. Now, Jung believed that the figure of Christ in the Gospels was too agreeable, too merciful, too tilted towards mercy, and that called out for a counter position, and that was the counter position of judgment. Very interesting hypothesis. But then there's this melding of the two ideas that the judge and the redeemer are the same thing. Okay. Now, this young man told me that his life lacked purpose and direction and meaning, and that he was nihilistic until he read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a book I actually like quite a bit. I've read it 3 times at different decades of my life. And one of the things that's very interesting about that book is that it's an examination of the idea of quality, of the idea that there are qualitative distinctions between things, and that we have an instinct to make qualitative distinctions. And so a qualitative distinction is simply, this is better than that, which is a judgment. Okay, now what Ratzinger is hypothesizing is that the person in and of, you know how the modern idea is you're supposed to accept yourself. I think that's an insane idea, by the way. Really, I can't think of a more nihilistic idea than that you're already okay. It's like, no, you're not. And the reason you're not is because you could be way more than you are. And so what do you want to be? You want to be okay as you are? Or do you want to strive towards what's better? And this young man, this Australian, he said that the reason that Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance had such an impact on him was because he wasn't happy with his current mode of being, right? He didn't consider the manner in which he conducted himself sufficient. And the fact that the author of Zen, and it was Persig, laid out the notion that you could make qualitative distinctions, and there really was a difference between good things and bad things, or great things and evil things. It gives you direction. It gives you the possibility of moving upward. And Ratzinger is pointing out, at least to some degree, that human beings are insufficient in and of themselves and need the movement upward. And so they need to conceptualize something like the highest good, and then to strive for that. And the thing is that there isn't any difference between conceptualizing the good and being judged. Because if you're going to conceptualize the good and move towards it, what you have to do is separate from yourself all those things that aren't good and leave them behind. And that's why the Redeemer and the Judge are the same thing. And one of the things that's really appalling, I think, about our modern world is that we're rejecting the notion of qualitative distinctions. You say, well, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings by saying that one thing is better than another. It's like, okay, fair enough. It's not fun to be cast off with the damned, that's for sure. But if people are, in fact, insufficient in their present condition, which seems to be the case, I mean, try finding someone who isn't, then if you deny the possibility of qualitative distinction because you want to promote a radical egalitarianism, then you remove the possibility of redemption because there's no movement towards the good. And it seems to me that it's a catastrophe to sacrifice the good for, well, it's a catastrophe to sacrifice the good for the equal. Because for us to be equal would mean, as far as I can tell, that we would all be equally unredeemed and miserable.